My younger sister stood up in the middle of our grandmother's 75th birthday dinner, lifted her wine glass, and told 32 people that I had lost the baby anyway, like she was sharing a funny little update about the weather. I remember the exact moment the room went quiet, the soft clink of silverware stopping mid-air, and the way my mother didn't even look surprised. Someone at the far end of the table let out a small, awkward laugh. And just like that, the most painful thing that had ever happened to me became dinner entertainment. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever been hurt by the people who were supposed to protect you, then like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. But only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 32 years old. And that night at my grandmother's birthday dinner was the night everything in my family finally broke. But to understand how we got there, you need to go back a few weeks earlier, to a Tuesday morning that started like any other and ended with me sitting in my car in a hospital parking lot, staring at a blank phone screen trying to figure out how to tell anyone what I had just lost. The thing about grief is that it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no music. No warning. One moment you're planning names, counting weeks, imagining a future that feels so real you can almost touch it, and the next you're holding a paper with words that don't make sense because your brain refuses to accept them. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there. The doctor was talking, using words like common and not your fault, but all I could hear was the silence where something used to be. I remember walking out of the building, the automatic doors opening like nothing had changed, like the world was still exactly the same. Cars were moving. People were laughing. Someone was on their phone arguing about lunch plans. And I was just empty. I didn't call my husband first. I didn't call my parents. The first person I called was my younger sister, Sophie. I don't know why. Maybe because growing up she always knew how to make things feel lighter. Or maybe because I still believed at that point that she was safe. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright, distracted. "Hey Em, what's up?" I couldn't say it right away. I just sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers hurt. When I finally told her, there was a pause. A long one. Then she said, "Oh my God, wow. Are you okay?" Sounded right. The words were right. But something in her tone felt off. Like she was processing information, not emotion. I told her I hadn't told anyone else yet. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not even most of my friends. "I just need some time," I said. "Please don't tell anyone." She promised me she wouldn't. She said it quickly. Too quickly. "Of course I won't, Emily. That's your story." I believed her. That was my first mistake. The next few days blurred together. I went back to work because I didn't know what else to do. I answered emails. I sat through meetings. I nodded when people talked to me. I smiled when I had to. At night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head, wondering what I could have done differently, even though I knew the answer was nothing. My husband Daniel tried. He really did. But he processed things quietly internally, and sometimes that silence felt like distance. So I filled the space by pretending I was fine. That's what I've always done in my family. I was the strong one. The one who didn't need help. The one who could handle things. Sophie was different. Sophie was the one everyone worried about. The one who needed attention, reassurance, celebration. She had always been the center of the room and I had always been just outside of it. I didn't think that mattered. Not until it did. A week later, my mom called to remind me about Grandma Margaret's birthday dinner. 75 is a big deal, she said. The whole family's coming. You'll be there, right? I almost said no. I almost told her I wasn't up for it. But then she added, "Your grandmother keeps asking about you." And that was enough. Grandma Margaret was the only person in my family who ever really saw me. Not the version of me that was useful. Not the version that was easy. Just me. So I said yes. I told myself I could get through one dinner. Just a couple of hours. Smile. Nod. Leave early if I needed to. What I didn't know was that by the time I walked into that dining room, I wasn't the only one carrying my story anymore. And the person who had taken it from me was already planning exactly when to use it. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway that Saturday evening, the sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, casting that soft golden light that makes everything look warmer than it really is. And for a second, just a second, I let myself believe I could get through the night without anything breaking. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. White siding, perfectly trimmed hedges, the same porch light my dad insisted on replacing every year even when it still worked. Cars lined the street. More than usual. I counted at least 12 before I even stepped out. That meant a full house. A full audience. I sat in my car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, taking a slow breath in and out like I had practiced all week. Just dinner. Just a few hours. You can do this. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My makeup was light, natural. I had practiced that too, something that made me look like I had been sleeping, like I had not spent the last 7 nights staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning. My eyes still looked tired. I could not fix that. I grabbed the small gift bag from the passenger seat. A silk scarf I had picked out for Grandma Margaret, pale blue with delicate patterns she would love, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The front door was already open. Voices spilled out onto the porch, laughter, overlapping conversations, the familiar rhythm of family gatherings where everyone talks and no one really listens. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Roasted chicken, garlic, something buttery. It should have felt comforting. It did not. "Emily," my mother's voice called from the kitchen before I even had time to close the door. She appeared almost instantly, wiping her hands on a dish towel, smiling in that tight, practiced way she always did when guests were around. She hugged me quickly, lightly, like we were acquaintances. "You made it. Good. Your grandmother's been asking about you." I nodded, forcing a small smile. I would not miss it. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her eyes scanning my face, not with concern but with evaluation. "You look tired," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "Are you still not feeling well?" "Still. Not anymore." That word sat wrong, but I let it pass. "I am fine," I said. She nodded, satisfied, already turning her attention back toward the kitchen. "Good. Help me bring out the salad in a minute." "Of course." I set my bag down and stepped further into the house. The living room was full. Aunts, uncles, cousins I had not seen in months. My dad stood near the fireplace, deep in conversation with my uncle about something work-related, his voice carrying that same confident tone he used in every setting. He glanced at me briefly, gave a small nod, then went right back to his conversation. That was his version of acknowledgement. At the far side of the room, Sophie stood near the window, holding a glass of white wine, laughing at something one of my cousins had said. She looked perfect. She always did. Hair styled effortlessly, dress fitted just right, the kind of presence that naturally pulled attention toward her. When her eyes landed on me, her smile widened, bright, almost too bright. "Emily," she called, crossing the room quickly. She wrapped her arms around me in a hug that felt a little too tight, a little too performative. "I missed you." I nodded against her shoulder. "Hey." She pulled back, still smiling, but her eyes flicked over my face in a way that felt like she was searching for something, or measuring it. "How are you feeling?" she asked. The question was simple, casual, but something underneath it felt sharp. "I am okay," I said. She tilted her head slightly, lips pressing together for just a second before she smiled again. "Good. That is good." But that was not the end of it. That was not the worst part. As the evening settled into its rhythm, I started to notice the small things. The way my Aunt Karen touched my arm a little longer than usual when she greeted me, her eyes soft, almost pitying. The way my cousin Rachel avoided eye contact entirely, giving me a quick hug and then immediately turning away. The way 2 of my uncles lowered their voices when I walked past them, like a conversation had just been interrupted. At first I told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting, that grief was making me sensitive to things that were not really there. But then during appetizers, as I stood near the dining table arranging plates, I heard it. Not clearly. Just a fragment. "So sad, what happened?" A pause. Sophie told me. My hands froze for half a second before I forced them to keep moving. I did not turn around. I did not react. I just kept placing plates on the table, one after another, like nothing had shifted. But inside something had. I felt it. That quiet, sinking realization that spread slowly, like cold water. I moved through the rest of the room differently after that. Watching. Listening. And the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. People knew. Not everyone. Not yet. But enough. Enough for the air to feel different around me. Enough for conversations to carry that subtle edge of awareness. Enough for me to understand that the thing I had asked to be kept private was no longer mine. I found Sophie again near the drinks table about 20 minutes later. She was refilling her glass, talking animatedly, her hands moving as she spoke. I waited until the others drifted away before stepping closer. "Hey," I said quietly. She turned to me, smiling immediately. "Hey." I held her gaze for a second longer than usual. "Did you tell anyone?" Her expression did not change. Not at first. Then she let out a small, soft laugh, like I had asked something unnecessary. "Emily, no. Of course not." The answer came too smoothly. Too quickly. I felt my chest tighten just slightly. Because people are acting like they know something. She shrugged lightly, taking a sip of her wine. "You are probably overthinking it. You have been under a lot of stress." Overthinking. That word again. I nodded slowly, even though something inside me was already pulling back. "Right." She reached out and squeezed my arm, her smile warm, reassuring. "Just relax tonight, okay? It is Grandma's night." I nodded again. "Yeah, it is." But as I walked away, back toward the dining room where everyone was starting to take their seats, I knew two things with absolute certainty. One, my story was already moving through that house, piece by piece, carried in whispers and half sentences. And two, whatever Sophie had said, she had not said all of it yet. By the time everyone started moving toward the dining room, the energy in the house had shifted into something more structured, more performative, like we were all stepping into roles we had practiced for years without ever admitting it. The long dining table stretched across the room, set perfectly with polished silverware, folded linen napkins, and the kind of attention to detail my mother cared about more than anything else. 32 seats. I counted them without meaning to. Every chair filled. Every eye somewhere. I took my place halfway down the table, not at the center, not at the edge, exactly where I had always been, close enough to be included, far enough to be overlooked. Grandma Margaret sat at the head, her posture straight, her presence quiet but steady, the only person in the room who did not seem to be performing for anyone. She caught my eye as I sat down and gave me a small nod, a real one. Not the kind people give when they are trying to look polite. It grounded me just a little. Across from me, Sophie slipped into her chair, smoothing her dress, her expression calm, almost relaxed, like she had nothing to hide. Dinner started the way it always did, with my father standing briefly, raising his glass, making a short speech about family, about gratitude, about how important it was to be together. People smiled. People nodded. Glasses clinked. It all sounded right. It always did. Plates were passed. Conversations started. First it felt almost normal. I focused on small things. The texture of the napkin in my hands. The sound of forks against plates. The rhythm of voices blending together. I kept my answers short when people spoke to me. I smiled when expected. I stayed quiet when I could. But then the questions started. Not directly. Not at first. My Aunt Karen leaned slightly toward me from 2 seats down, her voice soft, careful. "So how have you been, Emily?" "Really? Really?" That word carried weight. I nodded, keeping my tone even. "I have been busy with work." She held my gaze for a second longer than necessary, then nodded slowly, like she understood something I had not said. "Of course. That makes sense." But her eyes did not leave me right away. A few minutes later, my cousin Rachel spoke up from across the table. "I heard you were not feeling well recently." The table quieted just a little. Not enough for everyone to notice. Enough for me to feel it. I kept my expression steady. "I am fine now." She smiled quick, tight. "That is good. That is really good." And then she looked down at her plate. Conversation shifted again, but it did not fully recover. It hovered. It circled. Like something was waiting. I could feel it building layer by layer, each small comment stacking on top of the last. Someone asked about work. Someone else asked about travel plans. Normal questions. Safe questions. But underneath them there was something else. Awareness. Curiosity. And then Sophie spoke. It was subtle at first. She laughed at something my uncle said. Then leaned back in her chair, swirling the wine in her glass like she was thinking about something amusing. You know, she said lightly, her voice carrying just enough to reach more than the people next to her. It is funny how life never really goes the way you plan it. A few people chuckled politely. It sounded like a harmless comment. A general observation. I felt my chest tighten anyway. She glanced in my direction for half a second. Then back to the group. Like you can have everything lined up, everything perfect, and then suddenly... She paused, tilting her head slightly. Things just do not work out. My fingers curled slightly around my fork. No one responded right away. The room held that moment just long enough to make it noticeable. Then my mother stepped in, her voice quick, controlled. Well, that is life, right? You just move forward. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Sophie nodded, smiling too, like they were sharing a private understanding. Exactly. You move forward. But she was not done. Not yet. Dinner continued, but the tone had shifted. Conversations became shorter. More people were listening than speaking now. Watching. Waiting. I could feel their attention moving subtly like a spotlight slowly turning. And then it happened again. This time closer. This time clearer. My cousin's husband, Mark, asked casually from the far side of the table. So Emily, are you and Daniel still planning on starting a family soon? The question landed harder than it should have. Maybe because it sounded so normal. So harmless. Maybe because it was not. I opened my mouth but no words came out right away. I could feel every eye near me shift, not openly but enough. Sophie set her glass down softly. That sound cut through everything. She leaned forward just slightly, her expression sympathetic, almost gentle. Oh, Mark, she said, her tone light, almost playful. I do not think Emily needs to answer that. A few people smiled, unsure. He frowned slightly. Oh, I did not mean anything by it. I was just asking. Sophie shook her head, still smiling, like she was about to share something small, something insignificant. No, it is okay. It is just, things have been a little complicated lately. Complicated. The word hung there, heavy, incomplete. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears now. Slow. Loud. Wrong. Sophie, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. It is fine. She turned to me immediately, her expression soft, concerned, like she was trying to protect me. Emily, you do not have to pretend. Pretend. That word hit differently. And then she looked back at the table. Not at me. At them. At everyone. And in that moment I understood something with absolute clarity. This was not an accident. This was not a slip. This was a setup. And whatever she was about to say next, she had been waiting for the right moment to say it. The room did not explode right away. That would have been easier. It would have been cleaner. Instead, everything slowed down, like the air itself had thickened. Like everyone was waiting for something they did not fully understand yet. Sophie kept her eyes on the table for just a second, like she was choosing her words carefully, like this was something delicate. Then she looked up again, directly at Mark, but loud enough for everyone. I mean, Emily was pregnant, she said softly, almost gently. But she lost it. The words landed quietly. Too quietly. For half a second no one reacted. It was like the entire table had stopped breathing at the same time. Then someone on the far end inhaled sharply. A fork hit a plate with a small metallic sound. And then just like that the silence cracked. Not into outrage. Not into support. Into something worse. Into confusion. Into discomfort. Into that awkward, shifting energy where people do not know how to respond, so they respond wrong. Oh, I did not know, someone said, their voice low, uncertain. That is unfortunate, another added, like they were commenting on the weather. I felt my body go completely still. Not frozen. Just still. Like every instinct I had was telling me that if I did not move, if I did not react, maybe this moment would pass without fully landing. Sophie let out a small sigh, shaking her head slightly, like she was sharing something difficult. Yeah, it has been really hard for her, she said, her tone soft, sympathetic, the kind people use when they want to look compassionate. But she was not looking at me. She was looking at them. At the audience. I told her she should not come tonight, she added, almost as an afterthought. But you know Emily. She always tries to act like everything is fine. A few people nodded. That familiar narrative. The strong one. The one who pretends. The one who does not need help. I could feel the weight of their agreement settling around me. My mother shifted in her seat, her napkin tightening in her hands. She did not speak. My father stared at his plate, his jaw set, like this was something inconvenient rather than painful. And that was the moment it fully hit me. Not just that Sophie had told them, but how she had told them, framed it, positioned herself inside it. Not as the one who broke my trust, but as the one who cared. The one who tried to protect me. The one who knew. I swallowed slowly, my throat tight, dry. I could feel my heartbeat in my hands now, in my fingertips, in the slight tremor I was trying to control. Across the table, my Aunt Karen reached out slightly, like she was about to say something, then stopped herself. No one wanted to be the first to step into it. And Sophie, she was still talking. It was just one of those things, she continued, her voice calm, almost conversational now, like she had settled into the role she had created. The doctor said it happens all the time. Nothing you can really do. She shrugged lightly. That shrug felt louder than anything she had said. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly. Not visibly. Just a quiet internal shift. Like a line had been crossed so completely there was no going back to where things were before. I set my fork down carefully. The sound was small. Controlled. I kept my eyes on the table for a second, then lifted them slowly. People were looking at me now. Not directly. Not openly. But enough. Enough to feel it. Enough to know I had become the center of something I had never agreed to share. Sophie, I said, my voice low, steady, even though it felt like it was coming from somewhere far away. That was not yours to tell. The words hung there. Clear. Simple. She turned to me immediately, her expression shifting into something that looked like concern, but felt like performance. Emily, I was just trying to explain, she said softly. People were asking. Asking. That word twisted something in my chest. Then you say nothing, I replied just as quietly. Her lips pressed together for a second. Then she let out a small breath, like she was the one being put in a difficult position. I thought it would be better if it came from someone who actually knew what happened, she said. Better. For who? I did not respond right away. I could feel the eyes again. Waiting. Watching. And then from the head of the table, a sound cut through everything. It was not loud. Did not need to be. The soft, deliberate placement of a glass back onto the table. Grandma Margaret. She had not spoken yet. Not once since dinner started. But now, every single person in that room turned toward her at the same time. She did not look at Sophie first. She looked at me. Just for a second. And in that look there was no confusion. No discomfort. Just clarity. Then she turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, towards Sophie. And when she spoke, her voice was calm. Measured. Controlled in a way that made the entire room feel smaller. That, she said, pausing just long enough for the weight of the word to settle, was not your story to share. The room went completely still. Not awkward. Not uncertain. Still. The kind of stillness that comes when something real finally enters the space. Sophie blinked, caught off guard for the first time that night. Grandma, I was just... No, Grandma interrupted, not raising her voice, not changing her tone, but stopping her completely. You were not just anything. And for the first time since I walked into that house, I felt something shift. Not inside me. In the room. No one moved after that. Not immediately. It was like the entire room had been reset, like whatever invisible script everyone had been following up until that point had suddenly been torn in half, and no one knew what came next. Sophie's smile faded just slightly, but enough to show the crack underneath. She shifted in her chair, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Grandma, I did not mean anything by it, she said, her voice softer now, less certain, like she was trying to step back into control. I was just trying to help people understand. Help. That word landed wrong. Again. Grandma did not respond right away. She let the silence stretch, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but in a way that felt deliberate, like she was giving Sophie space to hear what she had just said. Then she leaned back slightly in her chair, her hands resting calmly in front of her. Understanding does not require exposure, she said, her voice even steady, each word placed carefully. And compassion does not begin with someone else's pain being turned into conversation. No one interrupted. No one shifted. Even the small background sounds, the clink of glasses, the quiet movement of chairs had stopped. My father cleared his throat lightly, like he was about to step in, but then stopped himself. My mother looked down at her lap, her hands folded tightly together, her expression unreadable. Sophie let out a small breath, her shoulders lifting slightly before dropping again. I think you are overreacting, she said, her tone still controlled, but now carrying a thin edge underneath it. People talk about these things all the time. It is not like it is a secret. A few heads shifted slightly around the table, not in agreement, not in support, just movement. Uncertainty. Grandma's gaze did not change. It was a secret, she said simply, because it was not yours. The simplicity of it made it heavier. Sophie opened her mouth again, then closed it, her eyes flicking briefly toward my parents, like she was looking for reinforcement. None came. That was new. That was different. And I could see it register in her expression, just for a second, before she smoothed it over again. I was just trying to make things less awkward, she said finally, quieter now, like she was adjusting her position. Everyone could tell something was going on. I felt that. That shift of blame. From her to the room. From her choice to everyone else's perception. Grandma tilted her head slightly, studying her, not with anger, but with something sharper. Something clearer. Awkward for whom? She asked. Sophie did not answer right away. The question did not leave her room to move. And that was when Grandma turned her attention, slowly, deliberately, toward the rest of the table. Not scanning. Not searching. Just acknowledging. Let me make something clear, she said, her voice still calm, but now carrying something underneath it that made people sit a little straighter. There is a difference between being included in a family and being entitled to every part of someone else's life. No one spoke. No one interrupted. She looked back at Sophie. And tonight, she continued, you crossed that line. The words did not come out harsh. They did not need to. They landed anyway. Sophie's posture stiffened slightly, her chin lifting just a fraction, like she was holding on to something. So what? I am the bad person now, she said, a small, incredulous laugh slipping into her voice. Because I said something everyone was already thinking? There it was again. That shift. That deflection. Grandma did not react to the tone. She did not mirror it. She stayed exactly where she was. No, she said quietly. You are the person who chose to speak when silence would have been kindness. The room held that. Fully. Completely. And for the first time that night, I felt something inside me loosen. Not relief. Not yet. But something close to it. Sophie leaned back in her chair, her arms crossing lightly, a defensive gesture she did not even seem aware of. I think this is being blown out of proportion, she said, her voice flatter now, less polished. It is not like I said anything untrue. That word, truth, it hovered in the air like a justification, like that made everything acceptable. Grandma nodded once. Slowly. Truth without respect is not honesty, she said. It is harm. No one challenged her. No one even tried. Because there was nothing to challenge. The words had landed too cleanly. Too directly. And then, without raising her voice, without changing her posture, she added, and in this family, we do not excuse harm simply because it is convenient. That was when my father finally spoke. Not loud. Not forceful. But enough to be heard. Mom, he said, his tone careful, measured. Maybe we should just move on. It is her birthday dinner. He was trying to close it. To contain it. To return things to normal. Grandma did not even look at him. Exactly, she said. It is my birthday dinner. And then she paused, just long enough for that to settle before continuing. Which is why I will decide what is worth addressing at this table. The room went still again. Not tense. Not chaotic. Just still. And for the first time since Sophie had spoken, the focus shifted completely away from me. Not because what happened no longer mattered, but because someone else had taken control of how it would be handled. I sat there, my hands resting quietly in my lap, my breathing finally starting to steady, and realized something I had not expected to feel that night. I was not alone in that room anymore. No one spoke after that. Not because they did not have something to say, but because for the first time that night, no one was sure they should. The usual rhythm of the table had been broken completely. There were no easy jokes to fall back on, no safe topics to shift into. Just a quiet, steady awareness that something real had happened, and it had not been smoothed over. I kept my eyes on the table for a moment, focusing on the small details again, the grain of the wood, the faint reflection of the overhead light in my glass, anything that would keep me grounded. But I could still feel it. The shift. The way the attention in the room had changed direction. It was no longer circling around me in that uncomfortable, curious way. It had settled somewhere else. On Sophie. On what she had done. And more importantly, on what had just been said about it. Sophie adjusted in her chair again, this time more noticeably, her posture no longer relaxed. Her shoulders were slightly tense now, her movements more controlled, like she was aware that every small thing she did was being observed. "Can we just drop this?" she said after a moment, her voice quieter than before, but still carrying a trace of that earlier confidence, like she was trying to recover it. "It is supposed to be a nice evening." Grandma did not answer immediately. She reached for her glass, took a slow sip of water, and set it back down with the same deliberate care as before. That small action held the room just as much as her words had. Then she looked at Sophie again. "A nice evening," she repeated, not as a question, not as a challenge, just as a statement she was considering. Sophie nodded quickly, as if that confirmed something. "Yes. That is all I was trying to do. Keep things normal." Normal. That word felt almost out of place now, like it did not belong in the same room as everything that had just happened. Grandma's expression did not change. "Normal," she said again, her voice soft but precise, "is not built on pretending nothing happened. It is built on how we choose to respond when something does." That landed differently. Not sharp. Not confrontational. Just undeniable. My father shifted in his seat, his hand moving to adjust his napkin, a small, restless motion that broke the stillness for a second before it settled again. My mother remained quiet, her gaze fixed on the table, her fingers still tightly intertwined. Sophie let out a small breath, her eyes flicking briefly toward them again, then back to Grandma. "I think you are making me into something I am not," she said, her tone softer now, less defensive, more careful. "I care about Emily. I always have. I felt that. Not the words. The way they were said. The way they were positioned. Like care could erase what had just been done. Like intention mattered more than impact." Grandma did not interrupt her this time. She let her finish. Let the statement sit in the air for a moment. Then she nodded slightly. "I do not doubt that you believe that," she said. The distinction was subtle, but it was there. Sophie blinked just once, like she was trying to understand what that meant. "Then what is the problem?" she asked, her voice almost steady again, almost back to where it had been at the start of the night. "The problem," Grandma said, "is that care is not what you say. It is what you protect." The words settled into the room slowly, but completely. I could see it in the way people shifted slightly, in the way a few heads tilted just a fraction, like something had clicked into place. Sophie's lips parted slightly, but no words came out right away. For the first time since she had spoken, she did not have an immediate response ready. And that silence, it said more than anything she had said before. Grandma continued, her voice still even, still calm, but now carrying a weight that made it impossible to ignore. "When someone trusts you with something painful, something private, they are not asking you to explain it to others," she said. "They are asking you to hold it, to keep it safe." I felt my throat tighten again, but this time it was different. Not the sharp, suffocating feeling from earlier. Something steadier. Something that felt like being seen. Sophie looked down at her glass, her fingers tracing the rim absently. A small, unconscious movement that broke the polished image she had held all evening. "I did not think it was that serious," she said quietly, almost to herself. That sentence landed harder than everything else. Not because it was loud. Because it was honest. Grandma's gaze softened just slightly, but her tone did not change. "That is exactly the point," she said. "It was not yours to measure." No one spoke after that. Not my father. Not my mother. Not anyone else at the table. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to reframe. The conversation had moved past that. It had settled somewhere deeper, somewhere that did not leave room for easy exits. I realized then that the tension I had been carrying since I walked into the house, that tight, constant pressure in my chest, had started to ease. Not completely, but enough for me to breathe without thinking about it. Enough for my hands to rest still in my lap without trembling. And for the first time since that morning in the hospital parking lot, I felt something else. Not just the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, like I was finally allowed to exist in that moment without having to explain myself to anyone. Grandma leaned back slightly in her chair again, her posture returning to that quiet, composed position she had held at the beginning of the evening. She looked around the table once, not searching, just acknowledging. Then she said simply, "Now, we will continue dinner." And just like that, the room shifted again. Not back to what it had been. That was gone. But into something quieter. Something more aware. People picked up their forks again. Conversations resumed, slower, more careful. But underneath it all there was a difference. A line had been drawn. And everyone at that table knew exactly where it was. The dinner did continue. Plates moved. Glasses were lifted. Conversations restarted in fragments, quieter than before, more careful. Like everyone was now aware of how easily things could cross a line they had never noticed until tonight. But nothing felt the same. Not really. I picked up my fork again, more out of habit than hunger, and took a small bite, barely tasting it. Across from me, Sophie had gone unusually quiet. Not silent, but contained. She nodded when people spoke to her. She smiled when expected. But it was different now. Less fluid. Less natural. Like she was recalibrating, trying to understand where she stood in a room that no longer reacted to her the way it always had. And that shift, it was not loud. It was not dramatic. But it was there. My Aunt Karen leaned slightly toward me again after a few minutes, her voice even softer than before. "Emily," she said gently, "I am so sorry." I nodded once, keeping my expression steady. "Thank you." She did not press further. She did not ask questions. She did not try to fix anything. And somehow, that felt more supportive than anything anyone had said earlier. A few seats down, my cousin Rachel avoided my eyes at first. Then after a moment, she looked up and gave me a small, genuine smile. Not pity. Not curiosity. Just acknowledgement. I returned it. That was enough. The conversation at the table began to shift into safer territory. Work. Travel. Someone mentioned a recent move. Someone else talked about a new job. The usual topics that fill space when people are trying to move forward. But underneath it, there was still that awareness. That memory of what had just happened. It did not disappear. It settled. My father spoke up once or twice, his tone measured, controlled, like he was carefully choosing words that would not reopen anything. My mother asked about dessert, her voice slightly brighter than before, like she was trying to restore something that could not be restored. And Sophie, she stayed quieter than I had ever seen her in a setting like this. At one point, she reached for her glass and realized it was empty. She hesitated for just a second, then stood up to refill it herself instead of asking someone else. It was a small thing, but I noticed. Everyone noticed. The unspoken dynamics that had always existed in that family were shifting piece by piece, in ways that no one was naming out loud. I found myself watching it, not with satisfaction, not with anger, just with a kind of detached clarity. Like I was seeing the structure of something for the first time instead of just living inside it. About halfway through the meal, Grandma set her fork down again. Not sharply. Not abruptly. Just enough to draw attention without demanding it. Conversations softened. Heads turned slightly. She did not stand this time. She did not need to. "Before we finish," she said, her voice calm, steady, "there is something I would like to say." The room quieted again, but not in the same tense way as before. This time it felt expectant, like people were ready to listen. She folded her hands lightly in front of her, her gaze moving slowly across the table, not lingering on anyone in particular. "I have spent 75 years building this family," she said. "Not just in name. In values. In how we treat one another." No one interrupted. No one even shifted. She continued. And what I saw tonight reminded me that those values are not automatic. They are choices. Her eyes moved briefly toward Sophie, then back to the center of the table. Every single one of us chooses in small moments who we are to each other. I felt that. Not as a statement directed at me. As something larger. Something that reached beyond what had just happened. And those choices, she added, have consequences. Not always immediate. But always real. The word consequences settled into the room with a quiet weight. Sophie's posture stiffened again just slightly, like she recognized something in that word that no one else needed explained. My father shifted in his seat, his expression tightening, but he said nothing. My mother looked down again, her fingers adjusting her napkin for the third time. Grandma paused for a moment, letting the silence hold, then continued. I do not believe in punishing people for mistakes. That seemed to ease something in the room just a fraction. But she did not stop there. But I do believe in accountability, she said. And I believe that trust, once broken, does not simply return because we wish it to. That was different. That landed differently. I could feel it in the way the air shifted again, not tense, not sharp, but grounded. Real. Sophie looked up at that, her eyes moving toward Grandma, her expression harder to read now, less certain. Grandma, she started, her voice quieter than it had been all evening, but Grandma lifted her hand slightly, not to silence her harshly, just enough to pause her. I am not asking for explanations tonight, she said. I am making decisions. Decisions. That word carried something heavier than anything she had said before. My heart skipped once, just briefly, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that this was not just about what had happened at dinner anymore. This was something else. Something that had been forming long before tonight. She reached for her glass again, took a slow sip, then set it down with that same controlled precision. Every movement intentional. Every pause deliberate. And then she looked directly at Sophie. Not with anger. Not with disappointment. With clarity. When someone shows you how they handle another person's vulnerability, she said, you pay attention. No one spoke. No one even breathed too loudly. Because that tells you everything you need to know about what they will do with yours. Sophie's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the second time that night she had nothing ready. And this time there was no way to redirect it. No way to soften it. The truth had been placed too clearly in front of everyone. I sat there, my hands still resting in my lap, my breathing steady, and realized something. I had not expected to feel at all. I was not waiting for this to end anymore. I was watching it unfold. The word decisions did not fade when she said it. It stayed there, hanging in the air like something solid, something everyone at that table could feel but no one could move around. Sophie shifted again, this time more visibly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table as if she needed something to hold on to. Grandma, I think this is going too far, she said, her voice lower now, stripped of the ease it had earlier, replaced by something more urgent. It was just a conversation. People talk. That is all it was. But even as she said it, it sounded smaller than before. Weaker. Grandma did not respond immediately. She let that statement sit in the room, not rejecting it, not accepting it, just allowing it to be heard fully before she answered. Then she shook her head once slowly. No, she said. That is not all it was. Her tone did not rise. It did not need to. A conversation ends when it respects the person it is about, she continued. What you did continued long after that point. Sophie's eyes flicked briefly toward my parents again. Searching for something, support, agreement, anything that would pull her back into the center of the room where she had always been strongest. But my father remained still, his hands folded now, his gaze fixed somewhere in front of him. My mother's lips were pressed together, her posture rigid, her silence louder than anything she could have said. Sophie looked back at Grandma, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable in her expression. Not confidence. Not control. Uncertainty. So what are you saying? She asked, her voice quieter now, almost careful. Grandma leaned forward slightly, just enough to shift the weight of her presence across the table. I am saying, she replied, that how we treat each other matters more than how we explain it afterward. The words settled in slowly but completely. I could feel it in the way no one moved, in the way the room seemed to hold itself still around her. Then she reached to her right, where a small leather folder had been resting beside her plate all evening. I had not noticed it before. Or maybe I had, but it had not meant anything at the time. Now it did. She placed her hand on it for a moment, not opening it yet, just letting that small gesture draw the attention it needed. "There are things I have been considering for some time," she said, her voice steady, almost reflective now. "Long before tonight." That shifted something again. This was not just about the dinner. Not just about one moment. This had history. Wait. Time behind it. Sophie straightened slightly, her eyes narrowing just a fraction as she watched the folder, then looked back up. "What does that have to do with this?" she asked, but there was hesitation in it now. Grandma met her gaze directly. "Everything," she said simply. And then she opened the folder. The sound was soft, controlled. But in the quiet room it felt louder than it should have. Papers rested inside, neatly arranged, edges aligned, nothing out of place. She did not rush. She did not dramatize it. She simply turned the first page and glanced down briefly before looking back up. "I have always believed that what we leave behind is not just about money," she said. "It is about trust. About responsibility. About who understands the weight of being part of something larger than themselves." No one spoke. No one even shifted in their seats now. This was no longer a conversation. This was something else entirely. Sophie's breathing seemed slightly uneven now, her earlier composure slipping in small, almost invisible ways. "Grandma," she said again, but there was no argument left in it, only a quiet attempt to slow something she could feel moving beyond her control. Grandma did not stop. "For years I have watched how each of you treats what is given to you," she continued. "Not just in big moments. In small ones. In private ones. In the moments you think no one is paying attention." Her eyes moved briefly around the table, then returned to Sophie. Tonight was not an isolated incident. That landed harder than anything before it. Because it reached beyond the dinner. It reached into patterns. Into history. Into something that could not be dismissed as a single mistake. Sophie shook her head slightly, almost instinctively. "That is not fair," she said, but the conviction was gone now. "You cannot judge everything based on one thing." Grandma's expression did not change. "I am not," she said. "I am confirming what I have already seen." The distinction was quiet, but it was final. I felt something shift again, deeper this time. Not just in the room. In the structure of it. In the way power moved, in the way attention settled, in the way certain assumptions no longer held. Grandma placed the paper back into the folder carefully, then closed it halfway, not fully, just enough to mark a pause. "There are roles in this family," she said. "Not assigned by age. Not assigned by expectation. Assigned by character." No one interrupted her. No one questioned it. Because by now, everyone understood that this was not a discussion. This was a declaration. Sophie's hands were no longer still. Her fingers tapped lightly once against the table, then stopped like she caught herself. "And what exactly are you saying about me?" she asked, her voice steadying just enough to ask the question, but not enough to hide what was underneath it. Grandma held her gaze for a long second before answering. "I am saying," she replied, "that you are not ready to hold what you have been assuming would always be yours." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They landed exactly where they were meant to. And for the first time since this began, no one at that table looked at me. Because whatever was happening now was no longer about me at all. The house felt different after that night. Not immediately. Not in a way you could point to and explain. But in the quiet days that followed, something had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Conversations became more careful. Silences became more honest. And for the first time in a long time, I was not trying to make myself smaller just to keep things comfortable for everyone else. I did not go back to being who I was before. I could not. But I also did not feel broken in the way I had before that dinner. I felt clearer. Like something painful had been brought into the open, and instead of destroying me, it had drawn a line I did not know I was allowed to draw. Sophie and I did not speak much after that night. Not because of anger. Not anymore. But because something fundamental had been revealed, and you cannot unsee that. My parents tried in their own way to move forward, to smooth things over, to return to what felt familiar. But I did not follow them back there. Not this time. And Grandma? She did not need to say much after that. She had already said everything that mattered. What stayed with me the most was not the moment I was hurt. It was the moment I realized I did not have to accept being hurt as something normal. That I could choose distance. That I could choose respect. Even if it meant standing alone for a while. And if you are listening to this, if you have ever felt like your pain was turned into something small, something casual, something that did not deserve protection, I want you to know this. You are not too sensitive. You are not overreacting. You are responding to something real. And you are allowed to protect what matters to you, even if the people around you do not understand it right away. Healing does not always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like clarity. Sometimes it looks like stepping back and choosing yourself for the first time. Thank you for listening to this story, for staying with me through something that was not easy to tell but needed to be said. Wherever you are, whatever time it is for you right now, I hope you feel a little less alone. And if you have ever had to set a boundary that changed how people saw you, I would really like to hear your story. And if this story spoke to you in any way, you can like or subscribe, only if it feels right to you. My name is Emily Carter, I am 32 years old, and the lesson I want to leave you with is this. You do not have to stay in places where your pain is treated like something disposable.